A majority of keyboard layouts are going to be exactly the same, regardless of the type or the make or the model that you use. But I did want to just go over quickly what the keyboard parts are. Remember that each type can be slightly different, especially when you talk about laptop keyboards versus a regular desktop keyboard. Laptop keyboards can often have keys in different places, so you might need to become more familiar with your laptop than you do with a regular desktop keyboard. All of them are going to have alphanumeric and symbol keys. This is called the QWERTY layout, by the way, and if you wonder where that name came from, just look at your keyboard. If you look at the first line of letters, they're QWERTY, so the QWERTY layout is the easy way. That's opposed to an alphanumeric layout that you might see, say, at an airline kiosk. If you've ever tried to check in using an airline kiosk, those are alphanumeric, meaning they just go A, B, C, D, not necessarily the same way a keyboard would be laid out. If this layout seems odd to you, just know that when they first created typewriters, somebody really thought about this, and they put key combinations so that they are easier to work with than it would be if you simply lined up the letters and numbers in alphanumeric order. You're also going to see any set of standard keys. These can include the Shift key, Caps Lock, Tab, Escape, Control, Alt, a Windows key, arrow keys, Page Up, Page Down, Home, End, Backspace, and even more. Now these may seem very foreign to you right now, but these are actually keys that you will use very often. For example, when typing, you're going to use the Shift key to make an uppercase letter, or if you want to type in all uppercase, you might use the Caps Lock so you don't have to hold the Shift key. Likewise, the Tab key can be used, but it does different things. The Tab key can either move you across a page if you're doing word processing, or it can move you from field to field when you're filling out something like an online form. We won't talk about all of these now, but as we work through this course, we'll talk about many of these keys and how they can be used as shortcuts for menu commands. These are the function keys that I mentioned in the last lesson, F1 through F12. Now these function keys actually have special uses, and the use depends on what application you happen to be working in. The one I can tell you right now is that F1 almost always brings up a help window. All the rest of them, though, F2 through F12, will do very different things depending on which operating system or which application you happen to be working in. As I mentioned, you also might have a 10 keypad for quick numeric entry, which is great when you're trying to enter a lot of numbers. Accountants especially love this. And you might also have those special media or computer keys. With this in mind, let's actually take a look at an actual keyboard so we can see where all of these different parts reside. Now remember, this actually is just a sample keyboard, and your keyboard may be a little bit different. I've also brought up a picture of a keyboard that is used sometimes for people with visual impairments. So what you will notice is that the print on these keys is much larger than it might be on a regular keyboard. That's just so we can see things better for this particular demonstration. The function of the keys, though, and the location for most of them will be very similar in all keyboards. Naturally, we're going to begin with those alphanumeric and symbols that we've talked about. If you're familiar with a typewriter, this is going to be the same. But you know what? It's interesting that in the generations of these days, many people, especially younger people, have actually never touched an actual typewriter. The only thing they know is the keyboarding. In fact, we don't even find typing classes anymore. They're all keyboarding classes. So for those of you who are a little bit older like I am, we can understand and kind of smile about the fact that typing and typewriters are actually a fairly old technology. Instead, we'll call it keyboarding. But the alphanumerics that we see highlighted here are going to be the same. This is the QWERTY layout that we were talking about before. When we're typing, we often need to work with making capital letters, or using symbols instead of numbers, typing in all capital letters, or erasing letters by backspacing. So I've highlighted here the Shift keys, which can be found on both the left and right sides of the lower part of the keyboard. We also have the Caps Lock. The one highlighted on the upper right is the Backspace, which allows you to erase or go back from the right to the left. And I've also highlighted the Enter or the Return key, which is how we go to a new line in a computer or do a paragraph break. Won't get too much into that one because that's more about word processing, but these are very basic keys that almost everybody uses anytime they're typing some type of text. Next comes the 10 keypad. As you can see, the layout is very similar to what a 10 key would be, or a calculator. You also see along the top and the right edge that we have the basic mathematical symbols. the // for division, the asterisk for multiplication, the dash for subtraction, the plus sign for addition. There's also an enter key, which allows you to set an entry. And another key that's important is on the upper left. This key is the numlock key. If you ever are typing and you're trying to type numbers on your 10 key, but instead it's moving the cursor, it means you need to press that key. When this is disabled, you can see, for example, on the number 4, there's a left arrow. If the numlock is not on, then pressing the number 4 is actually going to move your cursor to the left. Likewise, the number 6 moves it to the right, the number 8 moves the cursor up, the number 2 moves it down, and you can see that there are other things there as well, like page up, page down, home, and end. So, if your 10 key isn't typing numbers and you want it to, press the numlock key. The more common way to move your cursor using the keyboard is to actually use the cursor or the arrow keys, usually located between the alphanumeric keys and the 10 key. These are simply up, down, left, and right, and will move your cursor in that specified direction. Just above this is a set of 6 special keys that actually I use quite a bit. They include insert and delete, home and end, page up and page down. Insert actually toggles you between insert mode and overtype mode, which again we won't talk about here because that's a word processing thing. Delete is kind of the opposite of backspace. When you press the backspace key, it erases things to the left of the cursor. When you press the delete key, it deletes things to the right of the cursor. The delete key can also be used to remove something that's selected. So, for example, if you left-clicked on a file to select it and then pressed delete, it would delete that file from the computer. The home key moves your cursor to the beginning of a line, and the end key moves it to the end of a line. And page up and page down simply scroll your screen up or down in the appropriate direction. Now we get to some special keys. There is one on each side of the spacebar, the Control key and the Alt key. The short version of this is that these keys, usually in combination with other keys, allow you to do special things. For example, pressing the Alt key and a letter will display a menu. Alt F, for example, displays the file menu instead of having to click on it with the mouse. The Control key usually does system things. For example, Control P prints something, Control S saves something, and Control O will open something. These are some shortcuts that we'll go through again as we move through the course. But just so you know for now, Control and Alt are often used in combination with other keys to perform special functions. Recent keyboards will also have a Windows key of some sort, and this is used for doing special Windows things. And I'll demonstrate some of these when we get into talking about the Windows desktop. One of the things it does, though, is this is the same as clicking on the Start button. So again, if you didn't have a mouse or you didn't want to move to your mouse, you could press this button on the keyboard to display the Start menu, which we've already seen a couple of times in this course. Then we get to those function keys, which I've mentioned a couple of times, F1 through F12. F1 almost always will bring up help for whatever you happen to be in. So if you're looking at the Windows desktop, it will bring up help for Windows. If you were in Microsoft Word, it would bring up help for Word. The rest of the function keys do very different things depending on the specific application that you're in, and that's part of learning about those software programs. The last key that we'll talk about is the Escape key. Now I love the Escape key because it does some nice things. Basically, the Escape key lets us back out of something. So if I selected something and I didn't want to go ahead and click on something inside of that, I could press Escape to get out of it. If I display a menu, it will hide the menu. If I opened a dialog box, pressing Escape will close the dialog box without having to click or without having to make a choice. We'll talk more about the Escape key as we work with some special applications as well. So now when you look at the keyboard, you can see that instead of just being a whole bunch of buttons, they actually are located in specific areas, and those areas tend to do specific things. You may or may not use all of the buttons, and I don't care if you do. What I do care about is that you're familiar with what each of these can do, even if it may have a special function within a certain piece of software or application.